Welcome back. This is the third segment of Implement a Search-Based Site Directory, and in this topic we're going to cover the third step, which is building out the search experience, and we're going to incorporate managed properties, custom search verticals, and result sources into our solution. So why do you need a managed property? Well, anytime you want to take custom metadata that you've created, so in our case we have our custom list that we've created from our custom site columns, and we have that site classification. If I want to see that site classification data in my search results page, then I need a managed property. Also, if I want to search for specific attributes, for instance, site classification or site confidentiality, then I need to create a managed property that is queryable so that I can search on it. Also, for refinement and other attributes that we're going to be using in the Search Results Center, managed properties are a requirement. Now, in SharePoint 2013, there was a feature called Automatic Managed Properties. And what this did was took the site columns that you created. For instance, in this case, I have product name, product description, product color, etc. And it created crawled properties and then managed properties for you. Now, SharePoint Online doesn't do this anymore, and SharePoint 2016 doesn't do this anymore. But in SharePoint 2013, you didn't have to create managed properties if you simply needed them for display purposes. Then you would just go ahead and use the ones that were created for you. If you needed to add refinement or other attributes, then you'd have to still go and create your own refinable properties, which I'll show you how to do in just a second. Managed properties also solve problems for us. If I gave you the task of creating a customer list, and in that customer list I asked you to create a text field for customer ID, you might create that field with the name customer ID without any spaces, in which case SharePoint's going to create a crawled property called OWS_customer ID. Now, you may not be consistent when you do this, so you may also have cust ID and customer with a space ID. So now I have three different crawled properties, but I can still create a single customer ID managed property, and I can map it to those three different fields that contain customer ID information. And so in this way, we can use managed properties to consolidate and aggregate data from different types of fields. So here we go. Let's create some managed properties, create custom vertical, and then we'll create some result sources as well. So we're back on our search demo site, and if I show you what the list looks like, just as a reminder, here's my search demo site item. It has a description, it has a department, it has a logo, and it also has the security, confidentiality, and classification fields. I also have a site manager on here, and I'll show you how we can use that later on as well. I want to use all of these properties in search, so we're going to create managed properties. Now, you can create managed properties at the site level. Generally, I don't do this because I'm usually aggregating content from around the entire scope of my tenant, all of my site collections. So more often than not, I will create them in search administration. But I just want to show you that if you go into site settings and all you're concerned about is search within your site collection, then you can come in to site collection administration, and this is where you have search schema. You also have the same thing at the site level, which is the schema label here. But in my case, I'm going to go into tenant administration under search administration, and I'm going to create the search schema here. This would be equivalent to creating the search schema at the farm level for a SharePoint 2016 or SharePoint 2013 farm. Once you're in the managed properties area, there are three options for you: managed properties, crawled properties, and categories. The categories we generally don't mess with, but those are there to group crawled properties into specific groups that SharePoint manages. Again, not something we really mess with very often, but something you should know about. If I go over to crawled properties, this is where I will see the list of all of the properties that SharePoint has discovered in the process of crawling my content. So some of these might be out-of-the-box properties, others, so if I change this category to SharePoint, then what I see is a whole bunch of properties that are related to SharePoint lists and libraries. And what you'll notice here is most of them start with OWS_. This indicates that those properties came from SharePoint lists and libraries. So what I can do, since all of mine or most of my properties start with the word site, I can come up here and type site, and SharePoint is going to show me the properties associated with things like OWS_site department, site description. Down here it has OWS_tax ID site department. These are the full taxonomic fields from the manage metadata field that we added to our lists and libraries, whereas OWS site department here is just the text of the department field. So there are some nuances that you need to learn as you're going through and doing this, but as you get more accustomed to working with the sites, you'll know what to choose. Now the other one I want to draw your attention to right here is OWS_Q_URLH site link. So these are those automatic managed fields I was telling you about. So this is the crawled property. This is the automatically created managed property that was created for us. So some of these are created, some of them are not, and we're going to go ahead and just standardize so that we have our site classification, our confidentiality, our department, etc., so that it's all set up for us. The way that we do that is we go over to Manage Properties. Once you're on the Managed Property page, you choose New Managed Property. Now, when you're creating managed properties, there's a couple of limitations in SharePoint Online that you're not faced with in SharePoint On-Prem. So here you would give it your property name. For example, I'm going to call this one Site Description. I can only create a property of type text or type Boolean, yes or no, in this user interface. If you were on-prem, you'd have choice, you'd be able to choose any of those. In this case, for site description, I do want to make that searchable, and then I want to make it queryable, retrievable. I'm not going to worry about multiple values, and notice that I cannot change the refinability attribute or the sortability attribute. I'm not going to change the alias because using the name site description is fine with me. And the last thing I have to do is come all the way down to the bottom, and I have to choose to add a mapping. And in this case, this is where I'm going to choose the crawled property that goes with the managed property. So I'm going to change this category to SharePoint. I'm going to search for site D for description. I'll see OWS_site department. And then OWS_site description. Since this one is my site description property, I'm going to choose that. And then down here, I'll choose OK. So now what I should see is that I have the site description property to go with the site description managed property that I'm creating. And this is simply a one-to-one mapping. Okay, so we have our site description property. If I type site D, I find the site description property and it's retrievable. It's using the OWS site description. Now, okay, so we've created our first managed property. But what about those other managed properties that you want to be refinable? For instance, site confidential, site security, site classification, etc. Well, for those, we're going to reuse refinable properties that already exist. So I'm going to type in refinable. And since many of the properties are string properties, I'll add the letter S, and this will bring me to the refinable string properties. So I've got a bunch of these refinable string properties available to me, and so we're going to go ahead and use the first couple of refinable strings here. So I'm going to grab refinable string 00, and I'm going to choose edit or map the property. Now these are already configured for you, so we're simply going to edit them and map them to the properties that we want to map them to. The first one I want to add is site confidential. I'm going to add a mapping. Now, when you find your site, when you find your fields, you'll notice that there are two available. There's site confidential, which is the correct one to choose, and then there's this other crawled property that was created for you. Don't use that one. And don't ask me why not to use that one, because I was told not to by an MSDN article. So that's all done. We're going to scroll to the bottom and choose OK. And that's really all there is to it when you're adding managed properties. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and finish creating all of the managed properties, and we'll catch you back here in just a second. All right, so we've completed the task of creating and reassigning our managed properties. If I search for site now, what I ought to find are the managed properties that I created that include the word site, which almost all of mine do. So here you'll see refinable string 00 through 03, and those are associated with confidentiality, security level classification manager, and down here is the site link property, which is going to give us the URL to the site, and the site logo property, which is going to give us the URL to the picture of the site. So we're all set up for our next step, which is to begin using these properties in a query. Now, before you can do that, SharePoint has to come through and perform a full crawl of your content. You can increase the odds of that content getting crawled by going back to your site information list or any of the lists that you have content in. You do not have to do this for every one. Then go into once you're in the list, go to the list settings, and under advanced, there is a button that you can click to reindex the list. All this does is set a flag so the next time the crawler comes through, it will completely reindex the content in the list. This simply increases your odds of getting your content into the index faster. The way that you'll know that your content is in the index and ready to be used as either refinable or queryable properties is to go to your site, search everything, and then enter a query for one of your properties. For instance, maybe I want to do site security level. So here we're going to type site security level equals low and try to find our item. We didn't find it, which means we have to wait for the content to be crawled. Now some time has passed. We enter the same query and we find our item. This means we can proceed. So now we see that we've got our managed properties returning results. So we ought to be able to use some other managed properties. For instance, we created one called Site Manager. And I used myself. And so we can see that we're getting results back. So we're seeing our final result. That means that our managed properties have been populated by the crawl. And now we can continue. We can start building out the rest of the site. So let's take a moment and think about what we're going to build here. When an end user arrives on the Search Center and they begin their search, they're faced with an empty box. So they may simply enter a search term. So in this case, search demo is what they're looking for. The question you have to ask yourself is, what do you want them to find? Now, if you want to promote this notion of having a search catalog, then we can add a tab across the top that helps them, just like finding people in conversations, helps them find sites that they might be looking for. So we can do that using a search vertical. The other thing that we can do is we can augment the refiners down the left-hand navigation to help them find what they're looking for by, for instance, adding result types or content types to the side to help them find what they seek. All of those things are possible, but it all starts by deciding how you want the user interface to look. And we're going to do that now, and I'm going to tell you what I think. And what I think is, I'm going to want to have a query rule that if they find a site, it shows a sample of the site here with maybe 1 or 2 results in a query rule. But really what I want is a new vertical, so that if they're looking for a site specifically, they can click on that link and find only sites. Just like if I click over here on people, I'll find only people. And the way that we do that is with a result source. So I'm going to go to my result sources. And I'm going to add a new result source. Now, as I said earlier, a result source is kind of like a subset of results from the index. And so we're going to create a query that only focuses on our site item, our site catalog item. We're choosing local SharePoint because it is from the local SharePoint farm. If we were working in a hybrid environment where we have Office 365 connected to our SharePoint farm, then in that case we might choose remote SharePoint. We're going to leave this as SharePoint search results because they're not people. And we have to enter a query. So this is where, having built and gone through the steps from previous videos, you get to leverage all of that work when you start creating your queries against these content types. And the query is actually quite simple. We're going to select a property. I'm going to choose Show All Managed Properties. And I'm going to choose SP content type. And I'm simply looking for SP content type equals the manual value of site catalog item. Now, if you want, you can simply type it in here, but in our case, I wanted to show you that you can also use the property filter selector. Now, here's an important point. Early on in the presentation, I said that I was creating my content type with no spaces. And I do that to simplify the queries. That way I can just type site catalog item. If yours has spaces in the name, then you can either use quotes like this, for example, and that would pull it out. Or you can use the content type ID, in which case you would use a different managed property. You'd use the content type ID managed property in place of SP content type. Let's go ahead and test this query and see what we get. There it is. There's our one result for the site catalog item. Now, there is something peculiar about the way that SharePoint does its queries. If you leave the query the way it is here, when you land on a page that executes this query, right away you'll start getting results, which is not usually the behavior you're used to seeing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap this in a modifier that indicates that if search terms is null, don't run the query. That means I get no results back. But if I go to the test page and I add a term here, I'll get my search result site because it contains the word site. So basically what I did was created a modifier that says execute a query where you find a content type of site catalog item that contains the word site. And that's the result I got. So this is now working the way that I expect. So there we've done it. We've created our new result source. So the next thing I want to do prior to creating that new search vertical is I want to create a new page. So I'm going to create a new page, choose add a page, and I'm going to call this page Site Catalog Results. You'll notice it created a new page for me. At this point, if I want, I can go ahead and check it in just to make sure that I've saved a copy. But in our case, we'll go ahead and soldier on. I'm going to edit the search results web part, and I'm going to change the default. By default, it's going to query on everything. And I see that because it's directing the query to the local SharePoint results. What we want is the site catalog item. Choose OK, choose OK, and then we'll save and check in the page. There you go. We now have a new page, but we don't have any way to get to it through the navigation. So we're going to fix that by going into Site Settings, Search Settings, and this is where we create a new vertical or a new tab in the Search Center. So here's Everything People, Conversations, and Video. I'm going to add a link. Now it's important to note here that if you want, you could have this open in a new window, or you can address this to a specific audience. So let's say that instead of site catalog results, we were having results from a specific content source like HR content. Well, I could direct this tab to only show when people in the HR department were on the search site. So this is a very powerful feature that we'll talk about in a later video. In my case, I'm simply going to choose OK and OK, and then return to the Search Center. Now there is something funny that does happen that you'll want to pay attention to, which is the new pages that you create, they actually get added to this global navigation. It's a little annoying, so I'm simply going to come in and remove those two links just to clean up the user interface a little bit. Okay, so now my user lands on this site. I choose the word site to search for, and I click the Go button. Now this is going to search everything and show me all of these sites. Instead, what I want to do is click on Site Catalog, and this should filter on the one result that I have in my system. So this is how you use a result source, tie it to a results page, and then connect the page to a search vertical to be able to show only those items that you're looking for in that page. So what we've accomplished now is the flow of getting a user onto the site and then showing them how the site pieces fit together to produce this page. What I want to do next is pay attention to this left navigation and get it fixed, and then ultimately make this result look a bit better than it looks right now. So there you have it. Manage properties, custom verticals, and result sources. Next up, we're going to be talking about how to add the refinement and display templates to really build out this interface and make it look great. Join me.